Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing great today, Tim. We have on a guest who we've said before, she always comes to this conversation and she always brings it with the research, with how articulate she is, but most of all with the amount of compassion and empathy that she has for the people that she is looking into, these families who are missing sons, daughters, husbands, wives. You know, she looks into these missing person cases and does it not just with this investigator hat on, but with like a human hat on. But Tim, before we get too far down that rabbit hole, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for asking. And yes, very excited to introduce this conversation with our friend Laura Riste, who is back. She, of course, has covered Trenny Gibson's case in depth on her own and with us on the Missing podcast. So you can check out her website at Canadian Girl 77, and that's girl with a U. She's also got a Facebook page for Trenny Gibson, and those links will be in the show notes. But today, Lance, she is not here to talk about Trenny Lynn Gibson. She is here to speak about the disappearances of Erik Larsfolk and John McCormick Jr., and Erik was just 14 and John was 15 when they went missing from the Mccormick Farm in Caledon, Ontario on August 24th, 1981.
And this was a name that I think we had on our radar for a long time. We had heard about this, read maybe an article about it at one point, but hadn't really done a deep dive into it until Laura had brought it to us in this more complete fashion. So really no better person to have on to give us the details and, you know, deliver those details to the listeners more than Laura. Now, this is a really tragic story. This is a tragic story about two boys on the verge of being young men who, I hate saying this, seemingly just disappeared, just off the face of the earth, never to be seen again. And I know that sounds super cliche, but you'll hear all of the frustrating parts of this story that could have been done differently as you listen to Laura go through everything. But at the end of this episode, we've been doing these final thoughts, so we're going to save up our opinions so we can all collectively as a group sort of vent about how frustrating this is.
Yeah, well said there. Okay, so we will be back at the end of the interview with Laura Riste to discuss our final thoughts on these disappearances. Please make sure to follow us on social media at MissingCSM. We're going to break quick for commercial, and we'll be right back with Laura Riste. Laura Riste, welcome back to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm wonderful, thank you. Hopefully you are as well.
We are always doing wonderful anytime you come on the program to talk about your investigations into these cases, into these missing persons stories. And you brought a good one to the table today. Not good in the sense of like, hey, this is a feel-good story, but you have a real mystery here. But I'm sure many people know who you are, but for the few who don't, can you reintroduce yourself and give a little background on what brings you into this conversation today?
Well, my name's Laura Riste. I'm just an average person, work full-time, taxpayer, homeowner. But for many years now, I've been interested in missing persons cases, especially missing children and teens from the 70s and 80s when I grew up. And I'm fairly well known as that Laura, the person behind the investigation of the case of Trenny Lynn Gibson, who vanished from the Great Smoky Mountains in 1976. That Missing has done are we on part 7 or part 8 now? Series on Trenny. So
Yeah, I think it's 8.
Very pleased to be here as always, and I've got a real juicy tale today. So
Very good. Yeah, this story today is quite wild. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit about this story, the Caledon boys, and what time period did this take place in?
So this happened in August of 1981. I would have been a young girl of 4 years old when this happened. It happened in my home country of Canada. There's a few cases in from my neck of the woods that definitely had got my attention. And I came across it when I was about 5 or 6 years old, so probably 1982, 1983. At our local post office, they used to have a poster or two when you walked in the building in the entryway on the bulletin board, and it would just say, "Have you seen me?" And it would be a missing child or teen's poster. And this one happened to catch my mother and my eye that day because young Erik Larsfolk looked almost identical to my cousin Roy, who was a similar age. So that's kind of what got me started on it. There wasn't a whole lot of detail about this case. I originally thought that Erik just went missing one day and that was it. The most commonly shown photo of Erik is standing with a Dairy Queen logo in the background. It was a photo taken at the local Dairy Queen in Caledon, Ontario. Shortly before he went missing, he won a 10-speed bike. And actually, that red 10-speed bike was found propped up at the neighbor's garage, and that's where Erik had gone missing. But I found out later, probably in about 2003, around the time I discovered Trenny's case, that Erik didn't go missing by himself. He went missing with another young man named John McCormick Jr. And he lived about half a kilometer away from Erik, and they actually went missing together on August 24th, 1981.
So the boys were friends?
Actually, to tell you the truth, not really. That's another conundrum to this whole case. So what had happened was in July of 1981, Erik and his family, his father, his name was Lloyd, his mother, her name was Joyce, himself and his older brother David moved to this farmhouse on Horseshoe Hill Road near to the town of Caledon, Ontario. What had happened was they came from Brampton and they had a family-owned greenhouse in Brampton, and they were continually fighting with the city over rezoning laws and what have you. And the father, Lloyd, just decided to close up shop one day. They left Brampton behind and they moved out to the country to this farmhouse on Horseshoe Hill Road. Erik was a little stressed by the move. He said it was boring living out there. Nothing ever really happened. You know, that kind of quiet, laid back place. Probably not the most exciting place for a teenage boy. The neighbors were a family named the McCormicks. And originally their son, John Jr., had gotten acquainted with the Larsfolk family. Basically, John was hanging around with Erik's older brother, David. They were kind of into the same thing, fixing up old cars, that sort of thing. Kind of the kind of kids that kind of thumb their nose at authority, their family making them do chores and pitch in. So John and the older brother of Erik, David, they were more buddies. But what ended up happening was David was visiting some friends and he decided to stay an extra night. So when John Jr. came over to the house in the early evening of August 24th, 1981, he didn't find his buddy David at the Larsfolk house. He found Erik instead. But he just invited Erik to come over and hang out with him, and maybe they were gonna do this and that around the farm. So Erik decided to go and see, what was what. At least it was better than, hanging around home and being bored. So off he went on his red 10-speed bike that he won at the Dairy Queen, and he just never came back.
What was the family like? What was the family dynamic there like with the father and did he just have two sons?
There actually were 4 children, but David and Erik are the ones that really play into the story. The 2 other children, I think they were a bit older, so I don't know if they were living in the home at the time or not, but they really don't factor much into the story. Now, John McCormick, his family, there was John and his younger sister Kim. And they had come over when the Lars folks had moved into the house on Horseshoe Hill Road and kind of just introduced themselves. They didn't live too far away and whatever. But it was David, Erik's older brother, and John that had initially hit it off.
Okay, so how did these boys end up going missing?
So anyway, Erik had ridden his bike over to John's place at very short distance, half a kilometer away. And the boys were going to hang out. John was quite a budding mechanic, and he liked to work on old cars. And he had about 6 or 8 of these old cars, and he was very meticulous about them. He kept them all lined up and whatever, and he'd like to just kind of go tinker with them and stuff. So what he and Erik were going to do was they were going to get into one of the ones that was actually running, and they were just going to go and putter about the farm. The Mccormick Farm was about 100 acres, so it was a pretty fair size. So they were just going to go for a drive, these two boys, and, spend some time together, maybe get to know each other, that kind of thing. So Erik got into this car with John. It was an old black Chevy. They got it started and off they went. The younger sister, Kim, now that's John McCormick's younger sister, had been there when they left. Everything seemed fine. She actually left for the evening because she had to go next door and do some babysitting. So she was gone in the time where the boys were actually out in this field car touring around the farm. So she was gone from about 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. When she came back at 9 p.m., she was a little concerned because she noticed that one of John's old vans that he had was leaking oil in the driveway. So she thought, well, she's going to have to go now and she's going to have to find her brother because her father was literally batshit crazy about any of these old vehicles, leaking fluids, making a mess, anything like that. And their father was quite abusive. So she set off to go find her brother to warn him about this leaking van and get him to move it, clean it up, whatever, before their dad discovered what had happened, and she couldn't find him.
So to be clear, the father of the McCormick family is the one you're referencing as being abusive.
Yes.
How did you come about that information?
It's pretty widely known. You can find out through Andrew Livingston's article. He references it several times. Old newspaper articles about the case. He was a very severe alcoholic. He literally lived in a bedroom that was carpeted walls, floor, and ceiling. And he had a fridge by the bed, and he'd start drinking the minute he woke up. That was kind of how it was. And he wasn't as abusive to Kim, the daughter, but he was very abusive to John. And John would almost go out of his way at times to antagonize his father. It got so bad that occasionally it would come to blows, but at the start of the summer, there had been such a fight between the older John Sr. and John Jr. that John Sr. had broke John Jr.'s arm, and they had sent him to stay with relatives in Virginia. And he actually came back to the McCormick farm about 10 days before he disappeared. But he had spent most of the summer with relatives in Virginia, kind of a cooling off period and get the arm healed up, that kind of thing.
Wow. Do you have any opinion on why John would antagonize his father, knowing that his father was that abusive? Was he trying to take attention away from maybe the father attacking the sisters, so he put it on himself?
Possibly, but if you know people and have worked with people that have grown up in an abusive household, it almost gets to the point at times where you think that, well, this isn't going to get any worse. Why am I tiptoeing around my mom or my dad, whoever's abusive? I just don't give a damn what they do to me anymore. And they kind of thumb their nose at it. And, it's just kind of, they just throw the caution to the wind. I don't give a damn anymore. If they kill me, they kill me. So I think that was a lot of what John was doing. He actually was a very bright boy. He was very affectionate, and he always tended to look out for his sister, his cousins, things like that. He had a lot of good qualities, but he was doing poorly in school. He just didn't really want to be there. So I think the abuse was definitely part of that thing. And some people, like he was more mechanically inclined, that kind of thing. Book learning just wasn't his bag. He was a little bit of a badass. That is why David Larsfolk and he got along, because they had more similar interests. Whereas Erik Larsfolk, he liked school. He was very interested in Scouts Canada. He liked to fish. He wanted to own his own business someday. He didn't really have the same interests that John did.
And did Lloyd Larsfolk know that John McCormick Sr. was abusive to his kids?
Well, he found that out after the fact.
Ah.
But yeah, he didn't know that prior. It was more the kids came over and introduced themselves when they had moved there, not so much the parents.
Gotcha. So I'm, I guess, a little confused here. So what happened when the boys went missing? Like how were they discovered as missing?
What happened was about 10:45, 11 p.m. that night, Lloyd Larsfolk was at home, and he was starting to get a little concerned about where his son was. But he thought that perhaps Erik had gotten caught up maybe in watching TV or something like that, because they had just moved to the farmhouse and they didn't even have their TV and antenna hooked up yet. I mean, these are the days before cable television in rural areas and that sort of thing. So that's what he kind of thought that his son was doing. So he was a bit concerned, but not overly concerned, where he'd maybe go over to the family farm where the McCormicks lived and say, "Hey, Erik, it's time to come home." He said what ended up happening was Joyce McCormick. Now this is John Jr.'s mother and John Sr.'s wife. She burst into the house, the Larsfolk house, at about 11 p.m., frantic because she'd come home from work. She was a nurse, and she couldn't find John Jr., and she was really concerned about him. And Lloyd said, "Well, no, he's not here. The boys were playing over at your farm. They were hanging out." And she was so concerned that she phoned the Ontario Police Department and told them that her son was missing. So Lloyd went over to the neighboring farm. Of course, this is 11 o'clock at night and it's dark, to see, what they could find out, so on and so forth. They found Kim, and Kim said that when she came home at 9 p.m., there was no sign of the boys, but there was this leaky van. So she went out to find her brother to warn him that Dad's going to go batshit when he sees this. You're going to have to move it and clean it up. And she said, well, she couldn't find them either. All she could find was that field car that they'd been driving, that old black Chevy. Parked at the entrance where the property was, there was a side road that led to a gravel pit. And the car was parked there, the door was open, and the hood was up. But there was no sign of the boys. So she went back to the house and figured, well, I don't know what they're, farting around doing, but they'll turn up at some point.
Can you take us back to when John's mother was so concerned? How did she immediately come in and she was concerned?
She came in the house immediately, frantically looking for John Jr., her son. And when Lloyd told her that, she's not here, she flipped and she called the police right away.
So she was at work before that, though, right?
Yeah, she was at work that day. So she had no knowledge that Erik and John Jr. were hanging out together at her place. She just came home, couldn't find her son, and was frantically looking for him.
Oh, okay. So she didn't know until she
No.
came home. Okay. And then she saw that he wasn't there. What was John's reaction, John Sr.'s reaction, other than telling her that he last saw him with Erik?
Well, when Lloyd said when he went over to the McCormicks to look for his son, he said that John McCormick, he could tell he'd been drinking, but also when people are very seriously alcoholics, they can hide a lot of how drunk they actually are. They can conceal that to a point. So they expressed their concern, hey, we can't find John, we can't find Erik, what the hell? John did get up. He did take Mr. Larsfolk over to the gravel pit. He unlocked the gate and everything. He helped search whatever. The police showed up. They were searching. Originally, he seemed cooperative in helping. It was after that fact, it got to the point where he was acting almost as if John was no longer, and that was the end of the story. And less than a week later, he and his wife would pack up their son's room, and they wouldn't cooperate with the police, and they wouldn't cooperate with the media.
Okay, and that's John Sr.
John
and his
Sr.
wife.
Yeah. His wife was Joyce, yes.
John and Joyce McCormick.
Yeah.
So the parents of John McCormick Jr. packed up everything in a few days after this happened and stopped cooperating?
They packed their son's room up.
Packed their son's room up and then stopped cooperating.
Yes.
All right, we're going to take a quick break for commercial. And just a reminder, folks, that we will return at the end of this conversation with some final thoughts.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. So they didn't allow any police searches on their property?
There were more searches allowed. They just wouldn't give interviews, things like that. They would let the police come in and search because there was many searches done on that property. The property on both sides was lined like it was wooded area on both sides. Literally, their farm was kind of the clearing in the middle, the 100-acre clearing in the middle. They did allow the police to come search. There was a helicopter that came around doing some searching later that fall where they had like that thermal producing radar, things like that, trying to find anything. They never found a thing. The gravel pit was searched. They literally found nothing, not a scrap. All that was left was just this Chevy field car with the hood up and the door open. And there were some wires laying on the seat. But really, that wasn't a huge clue because if you if you grew up in a rural area like I did, there are some farm vehicles, at least there were back in my day, you couldn't actually start them with a key. That it had no ignition. You had to use a screwdriver, and that was exactly how they had to start this field car, was with a screwdriver and the wires. The screwdriver acts as kind of a bridge for the starter. So it took two people literally to start that vehicle. One person to get under the hood and the other one to work the wires and the screwdriver. So I'm presuming that was what happened. The thing stalled and they were in the process of trying to get it to start when they were intercepted somehow.
How far away from the McCormicks and the Larsfolk's house was the field car?
I believe it was at the edge of the property. Yeah, it's blocking the road, leaving the gravel pit's hood up, door open. I'll have to check on that exactly, but I believe it was down at the edge of the property.
So pretty close.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty close to the Larsfolk property too.
Yeah, they were only half a kilometer from the actual McCormick, so they were pretty close neighbors.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know if there were trees in the way, but I don't know if you could potentially have seen where the car was from the houses.
That I'm not sure of, but Kim said that when she went out to search to find her brother, to warn him about his leaking van, she found it easily enough, just parked at the entrance there to the gravel pit.
Now, with John Sr. being abusive, I think that's clearly a direction to look in, and then the McCormick's behavior afterwards being quite suspicious, I would say, in packing up the room and staying silent about it. So was John Sr. the only suspect, or were there other suspects?
The other suspect was a fellow named George McCullough, and he was about 27 when the boys disappeared, and he did odd jobs in the neighborhood. He and his wife rented a local property. And he did some odd jobs, and he also did some odd jobs for John McCormick Sr. as well. And Joyce, John's mother, and Kim, his sister, were both afraid of George. They nicknamed him the Weasel. They were very uneasy around him and did not like him at all. John McCormick owned a property. It was a body shop. It was about 8 kilometers from where George and his wife had rented a place, and really the body shop was just a tax shelter. John McCormick didn't actually do much in the way of body work in the body shop. It was basically just a place to hang out and drink.
Take us back to this Weasel character.
George McCullough, his truck was in the yard the night that the boys went missing, and it was covered. They was found to be covered the next day, the bottom part of it with red clay. And apparently George McCullough had coveralls that were the bottom parts of the legs were covered with red clay as well. Lloyd Larsfolk always believed that he had something to do with the boys' disappearance.
Why did they give him that nickname? Was there any evidence that he had been abusive towards the girls?
Not that anyone knew. He was just like a dirty, unkept guy, and somebody that drank a lot, and they just had a really bad feeling about him. Also, they figured that if he was hanging out with the father, John McCormick, who really wasn't exactly on the up and up when it came to being a family man, that he was trouble, this George fellow. In 1999, George McCullough was the focus of a newspaper article and a trial, and you can find this online. He tied his pit bull to the back of his vehicle and dragged the dog for 8 kilometers. So he was just an evil man. I have no use for anybody that harms animals, children. He actually died a year later in 2000 of throat cancer.
Well, not soon enough.
Oh.
That is a horrible story. Did he work for John Sr. too?
Yeah, he did some odd jobs for John. John would send him like on errands and things, likely to get beer, things like that, things for the farm. Yeah, he did some odd jobs around that place, and he did odd jobs for other people as well.
Okay. No, I know this was a different time, being 1981, but I feel like today, if that happened, investigators would try to locate that red clay. Was there any attempt to locate where that area could have been that George was at?
It was in the gravel pit area. It was in that area. And there was also some speculation because someone had said that a loader had been moved in the gravel pit. So they kind of tied that together with maybe that George had been tasked with using this loader to hide the bodies of the boys. But I believe they're in that gravel pit area.
Has there been anything done in the past few years, anything recent that has been like fruitful as far as a search or any sort of discussion with the property owners, the current ones?
The best thing that's happened is I was talking to Tim earlier, and Andrew Livingston has done a four-part series in the Caledon Enterprise about the missing boys of Caledon, and tried to shed some light on all this. He also interviewed the sister Kim, John's sister Kim. He did a couple of interviews with her, but then she stopped cooperating as well. I believe John Jr.'s mother, Joyce, is deceased now. She and John Sr., they divorced in the mid-1980s, and she remarried. And John Sr. himself, he died in 1986, I believe. And as far as I can attest, the new owners of that Horseshoe Hill property, they've been open about having investigations done. There's several photos in Andrew's articles where they've taken photos of the shop, what the shop on the property looked like now. They put a couple bicycles there, how it might have looked when Erik and John were hanging out that night before they went missing. As far as I know, they're cooperative. It was the McCormick family that was not.
Right. And I see there's been some GPR searches, ground penetrating
Yes.
radar searches of the garage area.
Yeah.
And I take it came up empty.
They didn't find anything, no. I think they're in the gravel pit myself, but that's that's just my theory. To me, that would be about the most logical place to hide them. And I think that was why George had the red clay on the truck, the red clay on the bottoms of his pants. Maybe that's why the loader moved. Maybe John Jr. just, took it too far with his father, and his father just flew into a rage. And Erik was there, and he was kind of collateral damage.
Jeez.
Yeah. And then John enlisted George to help him dispose of the bodies, potentially.
A friend of John Jr. says that the night before they had been hanging out, the day before he and John Jr. had been hanging out at this friend's place, and they got back really late. And John Jr.'s father was really upset and was yelling at John through the window, about this, this, and this. You didn't do this. You didn't do your chores. And John flipped the bird at him. So, I mean, it might have been John just took it too far and his father flew into a rage. It doesn't sound like it would take much to flip his switch.
And that was the night before?
The night before they went missing, yes.
And what was happening with Erik's parents at the time? How did they progress with any sort of investigation, or how was their cooperation with law enforcement?
They fully cooperated. They just wanted to know what happened to their son. Erik's father, till his dying day, he passed away in 2020 or 2021, and he was in his 80s. And to his dying day, he was looking for Erik. He just wanted to know what happened to him. So it was very difficult for the family to continue on. David, Erik's older brother, said, that could have been me if I hadn't been staying at my friend's place an extra night, because he said if I hadn't been, I would have been the one hanging out with John, and I would have been, I probably wouldn't have come back. And then Erik's mother, she died, I believe, in 2000. So she died not quite 20 years after Erik went missing. It was very difficult on the family, as it would be.
And what is the gravel pit all about? Is it like a giant mound of gravel, or is it something that's like more in the ground and you have to like drive down into it?
Well, typically a gravel pit is something that's naturally made, and then you have excavating equipment there like loaders and things like that, and whoever owns it might will bring in gravel trucks to load gravel trucks and so on and so forth, and the gravel is sold so much a yard being a scoop of a excavator. I'm sorry, I'm not an expert on this, but I know a yard is they sell the gravel at so much a yard.
And if the current owners don't have a problem with any searches going on the property, why has that not been like really, really searched?
I'm not sure. I think it's they're hidden somewhere, or it's somewhere very deep. Hence, that's why they use the loader to dig a hole or dig a pit to put the boys in. I believe that's where they are. I don't think, as far as I can find, that the owners of the gravel pit were against any searches. I just think perhaps in the early 80s they just didn't have the technology to look deep enough.
Right. Where is the police's official investigation for these boys?
Well, was investigated by the Ontario Police Department, so the OPP. They're a little different. Where I'm at in the West here, we have the Mounties, the RCMP. But in Ontario, they have their own police department. And it got started off, I mean, these boys were both young teenagers. The Toronto exhibition was happening at the time, and that was one of the theories. Maybe these two boys took off, hitchhiked out, and went to the Toronto exhibition. And Mr. Larsfolk completely refuted that, that would have happened. His son was happy. He was in a good place, just a little bored by where they moved, but he was very excited about starting school. And that would hopefully help him to build some friendships and whatever and whatnot. But he refuted that Erik would run away, and especially with someone he'd known, for less than 24 hours to this Toronto exhibition.
What did Eric's mother die of?
I believe she died of breast cancer.
And you said it was hard on the family. Like, obviously, it was hard on the family, but how did the rest of the family handle this? Were they
Oh,
sticking together?
David blamed himself. That's the older brother. He blamed himself. He said, if I had been there that night, I would have been the one hanging out with John Jr. And then, I would have likely been the one gone missing, or maybe we wouldn't have gone missing at all. We don't know how it would have changed and what would have happened. It was hard on the family. They spent thousands upon thousands of dollars trying to find their son, private investigators, posters, everything they could. So it put them in a bad place financially. Whereas John Jr.'s family just, oh well, he's gone, not coming back. They put all his stuff in boxes, cleared up his room, and that was kind of the end of that.
Yeah, that's unfathomable. The idea that they ran away, can you tell us why that doesn't work as a theory?
Well, there was quite a stigma in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even before that. It started to kind of change in the mid 80s when they started to bring bills into legislature where you were going to have to start looking for a missing child immediately, not wait 48 hours or 72 hours, which is what the case had been back in the day. It was often looked at as teenagers and especially two of them, if they didn't turn up, whatever, they were labeled as runaways. And they didn't even have to be in a group. Trenny was labeled as a runaway as well. Maybe she just couldn't handle it and she took off. I don't believe these two did that because I mean they knew each other for, like I said, less than 24 hours. They didn't take anything with them. John didn't have anything missing from his room. Even his wallet was left on his dresser. Same with Erik. When he biked over, he took nothing with him but himself and his bike.
And there's been no sightings or any sort of tips or anything?
No sightings. The father, Lloyd, said that the father of Erik, Lloyd Larsfolk, he got some crank phone calls, Erik's in my basement kind of thing. And he did his best to follow up on stuff like that. He went over to the house that was mentioned in the phone call with a flashlight, went downstairs, and of course the homeowner woke up, what the hell's going on here, and chased him out. But it was just a crank call.
He went over to the house
He went over to
unannounced?
the house that they mentioned in the phone call. He went over to that address with a flashlight, went inside the house, went down to the basement where the caller said that Erik was, and the homeowner, what the hell? But obviously Erik wasn't in the house. It was just a crank call.
And did Lloyd tell them why he was there? Why he just broke into their house?
Yes.
Wow.
That's all. That's all stated in Andrew Livingston's one of his segments in that article, those articles that he did. But basically, the Lars folks, they missed Erik and they missed what he may have become. He may have become a business leader, a scout leader, whatever. They missed what opportunities that he didn't have. Joyce McCormick, she sold the property and then she remarried and moved away. Kim married and moved away as well. And Kim was cooperating with authorities and folks from the media up until around 2008, and then she stopped cooperating.
And you mentioned Andrew Livingston. Who else has covered this story? Who else has done any deep dives?
Well, he's done the major part and probably the biggest deep dive so far. The rest of the Doe Network featured the cases, the Charlie Project. If you look on Facebook, there's a Facebook page as well. It's also linked to Andrew Livingston's articles. And I've talked to Andrew Livingston. He reached out to me about probably around 2020, so when we were in the midst of COVID, because I had made some comments and things on his articles, and he wanted to know if I had run across any different information than what he had or whatever. We were collaborating a little, but I really didn't know anything that was any different than from what he knew. But it was nice to chat with him anyway. And that was when he told me that he had tried to reach out to Kim and she wouldn't talk to him about her brother John.
Was John sort of a troublemaker?
He was in a sense, but he was close to his family. He and his sister were close, and then he was also close to his aunt. His aunt was married to John's father's older brother, and they lived nearby, and they had a little girl. And John, I guess, doted on the little girl, taking her for walks in a stroller and things like that. He had a tendency to look out for people and look out for his friends. But he was in a little bit of trouble. School wasn't really his thing, and he was known to antagonize his father. He and his mother, by all accounts, got on fairly well.
All right, we're going to take a quick break for commercial. And just a reminder, folks, that we will return at the end of this conversation with some final thoughts.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. And so no physical evidence was ever discovered in this case, huh?
Nothing, just the car. Just the car. Not a scrap of clothing, a hair, a shoe, nothing.
And that gravel pit, it seems like there was some water.
Water. It's fairly easy for things to get swallowed up in a gravel pit or lost. I mean, you're scooping up huge loads of earth. We don't know if potentially the bodies, if they were in the gravel pit, if parts of them didn't get scooped up by these huge machines, dumped in a gravel pit and taken wherever. We don't know. It hasn't been concluded that they've ever found any evidence that those boys, that they even existed.
That's incredible to me that this seems like it's going to be something that might very likely never get solved.
And there's been very little coverage as far as podcasts go. There was one done here last fall, but the one before that was only a short 20-minute one. It was just basically just a short rundown of the case. But like I said before, oddly enough, I didn't know that John Jr. actually went missing with Erik Larsfolk until probably about 2003 when I discovered Trenny's case. And part of the reason behind that came to find later was the family wouldn't even provide to the authorities a photograph of John McCormick, so they could do a missing poster of him. It was eventually a photo was given by a family member, but it wasn't his parents. And it was actually an old photo, but a photo nonetheless. But the child literally had no photo, no nothing, until one of the extended family members gave one. Like, why would you not want to provide a photo for your missing child? My thoughts on that are, well, what the hell's the point? We know he's dead. He's not coming back. What do we need a poster for? I think that was what the issue was there, but they stopped cooperating and they wouldn't even provide a photo of their son.
So that would mean that his mom would have to be involved in being like complacent about this.
Well, yes, and she would have also been under her husband's thumb.
Right.
I mean, we don't know how abusive he was towards her as well. That's been kept kind of quiet. Most of his fury seems to be directed towards John Jr., but we don't know if he was abusive towards his wife as well. We also know that she was staying in the situation, which, it did happen a lot in those days. She was staying in the situation even though her son was being badly abused, having recently had his arm broken.
Yeah, that's very sad. Now, I'm wondering, you mentioned the clay on George McCullough's pants and on the bottom of his truck. How did that information get out there? Was that from
Lloyd
journalists?
Larsfolk is the one who had noticed it.
So he had observed that. Did the police ever take samples or anything like that?
I imagine they did, but I don't think they could conclusively come up with any evidence that would link the boys to this area with this red clay to this George, aka the Weasel. I don't think they could quite connect the dots. Wasn't enough evidence.
Right. I just wonder how far they dug at the gravel pit.
I'm not sure, but I can definitely look into that and see if I can find some more information.
Yeah, I'm curious because clay is a part of the earth underneath the soil.
Yes,
So
yes,
the further
absolutely.
down you dig, it might change color and things like that. So yeah, I mean they could have been buried right over there, just down a ways.
I believe that somehow John Senior's fury, led to the murder of these two boys, and then he tasked George with, burying them, covering them up. I don't know if George, I don't know enough of his background except that he was the weasel and he drank. I don't know if he was the one that flew into a rage and murdered these boys. I think it had to do more with the father, which would have been John Senior. Maybe the van leaking oil, maybe that was enough to drive him over the edge.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, like, what would it have taken for him to just lose it to the point of no return?
Kim had said that, her father, John Sr., that was one of the things that drove him crazy about John. I mean, there were hundreds of things that drove him crazy about John, but one of the ones was the boys' love of mechanics and these old cars. And he'd lose it if John was driving one and, like ripping up the grass, things like that, or if they were leaking fluids on the driveway and that kind of stuff. And he also knew that John loved those cars. He loved working with them. That was a big interest of his. So at the same time, John Sr. could use his son's love of cars in order to kind of keep him in line, sort of thing. But the cars were always messy, dirty, in the way, pain in the ass, noisy.
And the Chevy field car that they had was left near the property. Was there anything indicative of like them being pulled from it, or maybe an
No,
accident, or any sort of like scene around it
no,
that would have, maybe suggested a struggle?
no, nothing like that. Just the hood was up and the doors were open, and that wasn't anything out of the ordinary. It was likely it had quit running, and potentially they were going to try and start it again, and the wires were just neatly sitting on the seat. But there was nothing like, they'd been dragged from it by force or anything like that.
Right, but with the hood open, it almost seems like you mentioned, they were going to restart it or something because
Yes.
they obviously weren't driving it with the hood open. You can't see out the front windshield. So yeah, it almost seems like they were interrupted.
David, Eric's brother, had kind of corroborated that. He said he knew right away what happened because he'd been out driving around with John in that same car. And he said it took two people to start it. So you had to open the hood, the other one worked the wires and everything. And he said they did that several times. In fact, he said he was the one who taught John how to start it. So he didn't find anything too odd or unusual about the hood up and the doors open, and there wasn't like anything that noticed that they had been taken away by force or anything like that.
And what is he up to now?
I'm not sure. I've lost track of David. I'm not sure what he's up to now, but he still makes comments on Andrew's article, and that was about 4 or 5 years ago. He's made several comments in there. I believe he's still alive, and the two other siblings of Eric's are still alive as well. And I believe Kim, John Jr.'s sister, is still alive, but she's just not cooperative.
How long have you been working on this one?
Well, I've been interested in it for years. Like I said, we're talking like 1982, 1983. Hey, Erik looks a lot like my cousin Roy. Even my mother remarked, "Wow," you know, that sort of thing. But in those days, we didn't have the World Wide Web. It just was in the back of my head. And then in 2003, that's when I found out more, and that was through the Doe Network. And then that's when I found out that, hey, Erik didn't go missing by himself. He went missing with the neighbor kid. And then I went digging and researching because I'm like, why is there no photo of this neighbor kid? Like, why is it just a name and his date of birth, that sort of thing? Why is there no picture? And then that's when I came to find out that his family really wasn't cooperative. They had gotten an old picture from an extended family member. Basically that's it. I've only ever seen, that photo of John up until a few years ago when Andrew, pardon me, Livingston started doing this series on the Caledon boys, and he was the one that was able to obtain several more photos of John. And you can see all that in the articles.
So it's been over 20 years since you've been familiar with this and looking into it.
Yes.
Was there any time during this period that you realized that there wasn't going to be any more information? Like, when did you run out of information? When did you stop learning new things about this?
Probably about 3, 4 years ago was the last time that I stopped learning anything new. Getting most of my information online, Andrew Livingston's article that he did, the 4-part series, and then I do a lot of my own investigation, just like looking through old newspaper articles, newspapers.com, the newspaper archive, and seeing what I can glean from there. I also did try to reach out to Kim, that's John McCormick's sister, but she wouldn't answer me.
Do you do that by way of email?
Usually email, yes.
Mm-hmm.
If a person doesn't have an email, then I will try a phone number and just, see for fun if they'll talk to me. A phone number is a little phony, an actual phone call is a little different. People are usually like, huh, what? Like, who are you? Kind of sputter and sort of thing. But who are you and why do you want to know?
Yeah, but I suppose that's kind of catching them off guard if they are hiding anything. So it's a good,
Yes.
it's a
Yes.
good tactic.
Yeah.
Wow, well, this is a really wild case, Laura, and I almost find it extra tragic in some way that John Jr.'s photo and, I some articles he's not really even mentioned as having gone missing with Erik.
No, it's a real shame that it wasn't featured. They weren't featured together. That's the kind of thing because obviously when I was 5 or 6 years old, there wasn't much I was going to be able to do in the way of researching this, and we didn't have the internet at that point either. But years later, there was still hardly anything about John Jr. It's like his family gave up on him. They knew he wasn't coming back. They packed up all his belongings and just went on with their life. And I believe that Erik and John are both deceased, likely the same night they went missing. And I think they're in the gravel pit myself.
Yeah, I think those are solid theories.
I had a person reach out to me probably about 7 years ago, and she's a clairvoyant, but when it comes to missing persons cases, she does not charge for her readings or for her information because of what it's about. And I'm not necessarily a huge believer in that kind of thing. I'm sort of on the fence, but if I'll take any help where I can get it. And she said that she believed that they are in the gravel pit.
Did she have that information going into it? Like, did she know that there was a gravel pit involved?
No, she actually claimed she didn't know anything about the case. She reached out to me with information on another case that she had done some study with, and then I asked her if she would be interested in looking into these two boys that went missing, Erik Larsfolk and John McCormick from Ontario. And unless she read it online somewhere, this was about 7, 8 years ago. I did not tell her any details about the case. I like to go into when I get any of these readings. I've had a few done. And when I go into any of these readings, I usually do what I call a control. And I'll put a couple of objects in my pockets, sometimes one in each pocket, or if I have a hoodie on, I'll put something in the pouch of my hoodie, and then I'll just sort of sit there and see if they pick up on what I've got in my pockets kind of thing.
What do you put in your pockets?
Just objects, different objects. Like I had somebody offer to do a reading on Trenny Lynn Gibson, so I put a comb in my pocket to see if they could pick up on the fact that I had a comb. I've taken like little ornaments, like a little cat or a little dog ornament, and put it in my pocket. I've taken a small stone and put it in my pocket, a piece of jewelry. I did that with Trenny's case. I put a necklace. I just closed the clasp and pushed it in my pocket. It had a blue stone in it, just to see if they pick up on what I had, kind of thing. It doesn't even necessarily have to be anything related to the case. It's just I want to see if they pick up what I have on my person. Because that's my way of controlling, are they actually seeing this, or are they reading about this online or somewhere and using that information to pick up on what the person did, what happened to them, and so on and so forth.
Sure. Did anyone ever mention anything about what you had in your pockets?
Oh yeah, several times. So that was quite interesting to me. So then I kind of thought, well, this person might actually have some talent in this area and whatever. So that's just my little control thing. I guess a few years back, Sylvia Brown came under fire for, I can't remember off the top of my head what case it was, but she said that the person was dead. They were never coming back, so on and so forth. And then later they turned up alive. So she came under a lot of fire for that. So hence, that's what I said. If I figure if these people have talent, they'll figure out what Laura's got in her pockets at the reading.
What do you have in your pocket right now?
Nothing.
I knew it.
Nothing. Empty. Totally empty. Lint. I got lint.
Lint, pocket lint.
Lint.
Wow. Well, Laura, yeah, this has been a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much for sharing this story about Erik and John with us. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate your time.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime. No, thank you very much for having me as part of the show. I'm going to see if I can find out how deep that gravel pit actually is. I'll see if I can get a hold of Andrew Livingston and ask him perhaps if he's got any insight. Or I'll go back through the newspaper articles and see if I can something jumps out at me to the actual depth of that gravel pit, and perhaps who owned it as well.
And do you have a place where you direct people to go if they have any information on the whereabouts or what happened to John Jr. and Erik?
Yes, the Ontario Police Department or Canada Unsolved. Please reach out to them if you have any information on what happened to Erik Larsfolk or John McCormick Jr. in 1981.
All right, we are back here for final thoughts, Lance, after the conversation with Laura Riste about the disappearances of these two young boys, Erik and John Jr. My God, what a tragic story. I hardly know where to begin on this.
Yeah, right off the bat, where I want to begin is what we were talking about with Laura during the interview and what you and I have talked about outside of the interview, which is if this gravel pit is the number one option for where the boys are and the owners of the property say it's fine to search, then why aren't they going in there with cadaver dogs?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it seems really obvious what probably happened to me. You know, we had an abusive dad, John Sr., abusive, sounds like to his whole family, not just John Jr., but he broke John Jr.'s arm months before, only a few months before he went missing. He spent months with relatives, Laura said, I think she said in Virginia.
Yeah.
He had only been back for 10 days before him and Erik went missing. And so he obviously had a contemptuous relationship with his father. I wonder if he threatened to go to the police over the child abuse. But it sounds like something happened while John Jr. and Erik were driving around in that car on the lawn. It seems like it stalled out, and they were in the process of starting it again when either John Sr. or this weasel character, George McCullough, came over there and something happened. And I just can't understand how this case isn't solved. I just can't understand how Erik was, went missing too, or was murdered and hidden too. I mean, this is just an unspeakable tragedy.
It is. And yeah, you laid out the scenario so well. Like, they were obviously doing this thing with this car, this farm car, which was a hobby that John Jr. enjoyed. He was good at, and with the mechanics of the car. And him and Erik weren't really friends beforehand. I don't know, like, where their relationship actually was. I don't think it was, like, contentious or anything. I don't think they got into a fight.
Barely knew each other.
Barely knew each other.
They just moved in.
Yeah. So Laura had repeated a couple of times how John Sr. would get upset when John Jr. would be doing these mechanic things and oil would spill onto the yard, or, he would make a mess or something. So I can totally see that happening, that they're whipping around in the car and the car stalls out. So John Jr.'s like, let's get this car back up and running. And they were in the process of doing that. John Sr. comes home, like you said, just a couple of weeks since he came back from leaving, which was a disgusting part to me. He didn't leave to go visit his aunt, right? It wasn't like, oh, time to go visit your aunt in Virginia. He left because he had a broken arm, and he was going to need to answer to people in the area why his arm was broken. And his father didn't want him to say, my dad did it.
Yeah, that's a great call. Also, for it to heal and for it to not get injured again. Like, it needed time to heal without him being hurt again by his father, by his abusive, horrible father. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So he comes back. His father is probably still, like, raging. He's clearly someone who's set off. He's got a short fuse. He's a short fuse individual, and probably just went into this blind rage. I have no problem speculating that, because what the hell else happened?
Yeah.
Some random person from outside of this town came in and scooped up these two kids, and they were never heard from again, when everyone has said, like, the father's abusive. This guy, Weasel, no one liked. He was super shady. And these are just boys. These are boys, and I mean, John Sr. could have done something real quick to one of them, and then the other one started fighting back, and it was real quick to do it to the other one.
Yeah, or the other one runs.
The other one runs, yeah. Yep.
Right, and then, like, they're just going to kill him, I guess, because he was going to tell what happened.
Yeah.
Any number of those scenarios could be true.
Yep.
But it does sound like we're not far from the actual scenario. And then the idea of the gravel pit and the clay being found on the bottom of George McCullough's car and on his pants, the bottom of his pants. So you connect those, obviously, and then you connect the missing boys. And this George would work for John Sr. occasionally. There's a gravel pit right next to the property. This isn't some puzzle that is too difficult to put together. This seems like very obvious, actually.
Yeah.
I'm starting to wonder why this is an unsolved case. It's so obvious.
Yeah, and well, maybe they didn't bury the boys because that would have taken, shovels and a lot of time to do it. Well, oh wait, no, they had a device that could dig as deep as they wanted. They right, like they had a backhoe. They had a device that could dig infinitely deeper than a human being.
There were excavators at the gravel pit.
Right.
So I don't know if they had, use of that, but I know on some construction sites you can just go in and start the the construction vehicle. Like, I've seen people do that.
Oh, of course. So this McCulloch character is helping out on the property around the gravel pit. They have this excavator. They have other machinery. I mean, I'm 99.9% sure he knows where the keys are to these things, or John Sr. knows where the keys are to these things. So super easy to throw a couple of bodies in a hole that was dug deeper than a human being could dig. Then what do you do? Do you just cover it with soil, or do you find other things like this, rocks, logs? Cover it with as much stuff as you can so that it's hard to dig down, but still get some cadaver dogs in there. Like you said, you're starting to question why this is even unsolved. Cadaver dogs. It doesn't matter how deep it is unless you're at the core of the goddamn earth. Like, the cadaver dogs will catch something.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. There seemed to be some water in that gravel pit too. So it seems like there was more area to hide the bodies, I guess. And this is just me speculating because I don't know how this didn't get solved. How, it sure seems like the boys are there somewhere on that gravel pit property, but they've never been found. Nothing of them has ever been found.
Did they take dogs in there?
I don't know. Apparently, it was searched a little bit, and the property was searched a little bit. But I mean, this is just one of these cases that it's like both families know what happened. Everyone talking about it knows what happened. Everyone probably in town knows what happened. The police know what happened, but no one's doing anything more about finding the boys. And I don't know. Maybe I'm missing where they searched for years for them, or but I just can't understand how this isn't a solved case.
I know. I feel so bad for the family. We were talking about how Erik's brother was actually more of the friend to John Jr., and had he been home, he would have been the one that John Jr. was hanging out with, and maybe Erik's brother could have done something in those circumstances, or maybe he could have been the person who's missing at this point. But I don't know if he still blames himself or if he's going through that survivor's guilt still, but just a terrible thing. Just a terrible thing when it could have been prevented.
Yeah, and it's kind of a nightmare scenario, like worst nightmare scenario for the Larsfolks. They just move into a new place. Yeah. The kids from the next door property come over. They're very friendly. They say, hey, let's hang out. Say, sure, sounds great. And then all of a sudden later that night, they realize their son is missing, and the family that he was hanging out with, they're not going to help you find your boy, even though they know exactly where he is.
Right. It's unbelievable. Even if John Sr. even if John Sr. had nothing to do with the disappearance, their behavior after is like unacceptable.
Yeah. No, they essentially moved on like John Jr. never existed.
Yeah. I mean, unacceptable is not even the right word, right? It's like, it's
unfathomable.
Yeah, it's not even human. It's not even the way functioning humans should act in a circumstance like that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention that John Sr. seems to be the real evil out of that family. Like, I know the daughter and the wife could have done more. This is kind of one of those silence is being complicit type of things, but we just don't know the scenario, like what John Sr. did. Like, I'm sure he threatened both of their lives as well,
Yeah, and it's not a one-off. This just tells you that, right? It tells you that this has been going on for years, and it's really not a surprise. I mean, it's a tragedy. I'm sure his wife, John's mother, and his sister, I'm sure they were affected by it. I'm sure they grieved him, but if this has been a one-off, this would have been different. This was something that I'm sure on some level they were expecting to happen. Someone is going to get very hurt in this relationship, whether it's going to be John Sr. or John Jr. Somebody's going to break because it's just escalating to that point. It's not going to get better. There's no way they couldn't have seen that that this was, they're not going to reconcile and say, well, we're putting this behind us. I'm no longer drinking. I'm no longer going to be abusive, because there's no counseling for them at this time. It's all just an escalating state of violence that is going on in that family.
Yeah, it sounded too far gone. And Laura described John Sr. as staying in a carpeted room, ceiling, floors, walls carpeted, with a fridge next to his bed. And he drank from the moment he woke up. So that's what kind of anger that guy had inside him, apparently.
A carpeted room, floors, walls, ceiling.
I believe she said ceiling as well. Yeah, kind of a weird image. But yeah, what a tragic story. And I do just want to give a special shout out to Andrew Livingstone of the Caledon Enterprise and the Canada Unsolved site. So there's some pretty good sources to check out in the show notes if you want to learn more about these disappearances. And to reach the Caledon police, if you have any information, please call 905-584-2241. Thank you very much for listening today, everyone. We really appreciate it. Make sure to check out Laura's site and Facebook group in the show notes. And we're going to have Laura back again very soon to discuss another mystery.